It seems that now more than ever, player contracts in the NFL are getting bigger, and every free agency period sees a slew of record setting deals. More athletes are seeing more money than ever, and teams are signing players to increasingly lucrative deals. But have you ever stopped to think about how the financials actually work? How are teams able to afford these exponentially larger contracts each year? Where does the money actually come from? Before we talk about the NFL financials, let's cover a couple other sports first. In baseball, there is no cap limit, just a tax threshold. Teams can pay players however much money they want based on club revenue. Of course, teams can get taxed by the league if they go over a certain limit, with this number increasing in percent annually up to a certain point. But for all intents and purposes, teams can spend however much they want so long as management is willing to pay players. The NBA functions somewhat in the same vein. This year, the NBA has a soft cap number of $123.7 million, but teams often will go above this. In fact, the Los Angeles Clippers and Golden State Warriors have over $190 million in their salary cap alone. As of April 1st, the San Antonio Spurs are the only team in the NBA that are actually under the soft cap. Everyone is spending money in the NBA. And the NBA salary cap could and probably will be covered in a separate video. But in short, teams can easily retain players using things like bird rights, which enable them to go over the soft cap. However, if a team goes over the soft cap and something called the luxury tax threshold, which for this year is $150 million, they must pay exponentially increasing fees. The further over the threshold they are, the more fees they're paying. There are technically ways to get hard capped in the NBA by doing this, but for all intents and purposes, there's a lot of cap flexibility in the NBA, and it functions very similarly to the cap in baseball. Then there's the NFL. The NFL has a hard cap, meaning teams cannot exceed a certain amount of money when spending on player salaries. Otherwise, they'll get penalized. In 2023, this number is set at $224.8 million. And year over year, the cap typically grows somewhere between 5 to 8%. So, if teams in the NFL have only a set amount of money they can spend, how can they afford to pay out the monster deals we see pop into our newsfeed so often? What makes the finances of the NFL so radically different from other major sports leagues? And at the same time, lets our favorite teams sign star players to these huge deals, all while not being in a soft cap or luxury tax system. How is the NFL still so competitive, despite all of the money seemingly being thrown around by these so-called contenders? How does the NFL financial system help teams like the Bengals, who went from one of the worst teams in the league a few years ago to competing in the Super Bowl? How does it enable teams to compete year in, year out? At the very least, give them the flexibility to build competitive rosters regardless of where their market is. What exactly makes NFL finances such an anomaly? To understand how NFL finances work, we first need to understand how we got to the hard salary cap era. To do so, we need to go all the way back to the year 1992, at the advent of free agency. At the time, the NFLPA just sued the NFL, hoping to win players the right to change teams via free agency once their contracts ran out, which was a novel concept at the time. The union had actually done this before, in 1989, which forced the NFL to implement a system called Plan B. Under this Plan B system, teams were able to choose up to 37 players to retain on their roster at the end of each year. The rest would become free agents. And though this was a good start towards establishing free agency in the NFL, it still largely prevented star players from actually hitting that free agent market, which was seen as a major concession at the time. And for these star players who may want the ability to hit the free agent market, such as Jets running back Freeman McNeil, it was not enough. Plan B was very flawed, and everybody knew it, so it was no surprise when the NFLPA sued the league again in 1992. And after a ruling by a federal jury in the U.S. court system found that the league was actually in violation of antitrust laws, negotiations between the NFLPA and the owners began. This ultimately led to the implementation of unrestricted free agency for all players in 1993. Of course, the owners wanted something in return for this, so in exchange, the NFLPA and the players agreed to implement a hard salary cap. This would limit the amount of money owners actually had to put into their salaries each year, and this system would take place in 1994. That year, a hard cap of $34.6 million was introduced for the first time, and this changed the game. Teams could no longer hoard players and pay large sums of money to ensure they kept all of their top talent like they did in the 70s and the 80s. They actually had to compete with each other now for stars. And as a result, it changed the league. So with that little history lesson out of the way on how the hard cap actually came to be, let's talk about how the NFL cap is actually calculated. And good news for those of you who don't like math, it's a pretty easy process. The NFL takes the total projected revenue in any given year from things like brand deals, merchandise, team revenue, stadium operations, and other football-related income. And it pulls all of this money together. Of that total, 48% of it is allocated towards the salary cap for player salaries, as specified by the latest CBA. Then that number is divided by 32, and you have the salary cap number for each team. As I mentioned before, in 2023, this number is about $224.8 million. Pretty simple, right? NFL teams have that amount of money to work with in free agency and for the year. But ultimately, we still need to answer this question of how teams are able to sign players to these huge deals. After all, they only have that $224.8 million to work with, not just in free agency, but for the players currently on their roster as well. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of money, but when you're paying each guy millions upon millions of dollars to play for your team, it runs out pretty quickly. I mean, just 3 years ago, Patrick Mahomes signed a 10-year deal for $450 million. That comes out to about $45 million per year. And yeah, Patrick Mahomes is worth every cent, but that's still a ton of cash for one player. And assuming that the Chiefs are paying him that $45 million this year, that comes out to around 20% of their salary cap. That's a crippling amount of money that the Chiefs are paying for one player, even if it is Patrick Mahomes. But that's not quite how it works, and luckily for the Chiefs, there are ways around this. And that's when we get to the interesting part of NFL finances. The NFL financial system has a number of unique rules and quirks within it that enable teams to regularly get under the hard cap. In order to discuss these concepts a bit further, I want to take a look at a couple contracts. And to start, I want to take a look at Mahomes' contract in more detail. Now, before we even begin, something you need to know about NFL contracts is that they are never fully guaranteed, unlike the contracts in the MLB and the NBA. The reasons for this are relatively complex, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but just know that NFL teams are not too keen on handing out fully guaranteed deals. Now, looking at Patrick Mahomes' contract, the guarantees in this deal add up to $141 million, with $63 million of that guaranteed at signing. So in essence, the moment Patrick Mahomes put pen to paper, he got $63 million in his bank account. And over the 10-year lifetime of his contract, he's due another $78 million. That's it. The Chiefs only have to pay the rest of that $450 million deal if certain conditions are met. Now, to be fair, for the most part, these conditions are along the lines of show up to practice and show up to the facility, but still, the team could hypothetically cut Patrick Mahomes this year, and due to how his contract is structured, would have to pay him out another $134 million, not the full amount remaining on the deal. They won't, but they hypothetically could. But for the purpose of this discussion, Mahomes' contract extension says he's getting paid $450 million over 10 years. And yeah, Patrick Mahomes will probably be making at least $450 million over 10 years. So by that logic, one would think he's making $45 million this year. But that's not actually the case. Looking at his 2023 cap hit, he's making $39.7 million this year. There's another $800,000 that he's going to make, which doesn't count against the cap, but we're going to ignore that. And when you look at the cap hit on this deal throughout the lifetime, it looks radically different. Looking at it from that perspective, it's looking a lot more like a 7-year, $228 million contract. And that includes the 2 remaining years of his rookie deal, which was active at the time of signing. When 2027 rolls around, Mahomes' deal is structured in a way where it will almost certainly be reworked. And looking at the deal like this, the Mahomes contract looks much more like a deal that has an average annual value of $32.6 million per year. And you might be thinking the contract says $450 million over 10 years. That here I am saying that the deal's actually much closer to a 7-year, $228 million contract. That doesn't make sense, right? Well, when you look at how the Chiefs actually structured his contract and the cap hits year over year from 2020, this line of thinking makes a lot more sense. Look at the guaranteed numbers and the cap hits. Do you notice anything? I mean, aside from that gargantuan $62 million cap hit in 2027, which indicates that the Chiefs and Mahomes are going to redo his deal by that point. There are monetary structures in this deal actually going out through 2027. The Chiefs are actively pushing money out into the future of this deal so they don't have to pay Mahomes as much now. Hence, when you look at these cap hits up through 2027, you hit that $228 million value. And once that 2027 date rolls around, the team's going to be prepared to rework this deal. They set up their star quarterback's contract in a way where it will almost certainly be reworked or restructured entirely at that point. In short, the Chiefs are exploiting the NFL financial rules, which enables these contracts to be structured in such a way, and they're ensuring that they're always getting a team-friendly deal and they have money to work with in free agency and for the rest of the roster. This should be illegal. Paying Patrick Mahomes an average value of $32.6 million when guys like, Daniel Jones are making $40 million per year is a criminal offense. The Chiefs can't keep getting away with this. How is this even possible? I mentioned before the NFL rules on financials are weird. When players sign a contract, the NFL requires the team to put up to 75% of the value, minus around $15 million of the guaranteed money, into an escrow account, pay out over the contract lifetime. And this is a relatively complex topic, and it ties into why the NFL does not give out fully guaranteed deals. But popular football YouTuber Brett Coleman explains it pretty wonderfully in a video he published a few months back. I'll link his video in the description, and I think everyone should go watch it. It's really a good one. But for this video, all you need to know is that the NFL allows teams to spread out the financial impact of this guaranteed money on the cap evenly throughout every year of the deal. Teams don't have to do this, and they can spread it out in different ways, like how the Chiefs are doing with Mahomes' deal, but it is an option for them. And per the NFL salary cap rules, teams only have to count money against the cap if it's guaranteed to go into the player's bank account that year, even from that same escrow account I mentioned earlier or through other means. Anything else regarding a player deal is fair game. Teams can push out money and restructure deals years into the future, and they can even add things called void years, which are years in contracts where players aren't playing for your team, but you can allocate payments to them, which will count against your cap. You can prorate or delay signing bonuses within the remainder of a contract, which further spreads out their financial impact. And you can do a variety of other things. But all teams actually need to do is hit that magic hard cap number for the financial year they're in. So going back to Mahomes' contract, what do we see? Cap hit of $39.7 million this year, which is the money actually going into his account, and restructures through 2027. Then, in 2027, he has that $62 million cap hit, which can be and will be restructured either into another signing bonus, which can be spread out further, or the team is going to sit down and hammer out a new deal with him entirely. But teams don't have to just be pushing money into the future. They can also bring it up, exploiting the financial rules in a different way. And that brings us to the case of Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. Daniel Jones is going to be making more money than Patrick Mahomes this year. that is a fact. Hard to believe, but it's true. And the reason for this is that the Giants structured his 4-year, $160 million contract in a way where he's making $46 million this year. Something important to note about this deal as well, before we really talk about it, is that the first 2 years of the deal is basically where all of his guaranteed money is. The last 2 years are relatively unguaranteed. So in essence, Daniel Jones, due to the way the contract is structured, is only really guaranteed to be on the Giants roster through 2024. And looking at the cap numbers and how the deal is actually structured, Daniel Jones really signed something closer to a 2-year, $82 million deal. So one would think that he would count for around $41 million on the Giants cap this year, right? The deal is relatively front-loaded. Most of the guaranteed money is within that first 2 years. And in essence, the deal is 2 years, $82 million. But Daniel Jones only has a $21 million cap hit this year. Why is that? Well, there's two main reasons. His base salary is actually lower this year in the contract because he's getting his signing bonus. And the cap hit for the base salary isn't really going to play into this until 2024. And remember, the other reason why his cap hit is so low is this signing bonus. The Giants spread it out over all 4 years. And remember, the NFL financial rules let teams do this. And the Giants structured this deal like this on purpose. They pushed a lot of the base salary out to 2025 and 2026, which at that point, the deal is not guaranteed. So that base salary largely isn't guaranteed. And since Jones's base salary is technically not guaranteed, if the Giants chose to cut him, they wouldn't have to pay him that money. In fact, after 2025, the Giants could hypothetically cut Daniel Jones off the roster completely and incur only an $18 million cap hit, which is the last 2 years of his prorated signing bonus, which the Giants, again, chose to spread the cap impact of over the lifetime of his 4-year deal. Nothing else beyond 2024 for Daniel Jones is guaranteed except his prorated signing bonus. In a way, the final 2 years of this deal act somewhat like void years in this regard. The Giants actually did the opposite of what the Chiefs did and attached all of Daniel Jones' guaranteed money and most of his cap hits to the beginning of this deal instead of the end, which protects themselves in the event he regresses. And these contracts I use to highlight these weird NFL financial rules aren't exactly exceptions either. If you look at other NFL contracts, you can see similar patterns begin to emerge as well. And it's these little quirks and exploits in the structure of NFL contracts that enable teams to still hit the hard salary cap number while maintaining the flexibility to sign players to large deals that are comparable to the ones in the NBA and the MLB, as well as building their rosters in relatively unique ways. You think your team won't be able to compete this year, or you want to maintain the flexibility to cut a player you aren't sure will pan out, like the Daniel Jones deal with the Giants? That's fine. Restructure their contract to pay them a bit sooner. What if a player is still producing, but not to the level you're expecting? What if they cost too much to keep on the current contract they're in? Just restructure the deal or just cut them. Cowboys did both with Zeke just this year. Heck, there's even more financial loopholes when you cut players past certain dates in the NFL financial year. What if you're looking to win now, or you want to build around a young core? What if you want to retain a key free agent? What if you need to free up money to sign stars to compete in the long term? You can push money out on other deals so you have more to work with now. So long as you remain within the number the NFL says to stay in for the hard cap, you can basically do whatever you want. Things like the rookie wage scale and the franchise tag system only further help NFL teams balance their checkbooks to compete. And it also helps them keep their top talent and attract high-value free agents. All of these rules and unique monetary interactions make NFL financials so unique and interesting. It also makes sure that teams are accountable to the league and, more importantly, to their fan base, and that everyone has a chance to compete on an even financial playing field. In fact, no other sports league has financial manipulation and contract structures quite like the NFL. Partly due to these financials, no other league sees parity like the NFL. I mean, look at this. This chart shows that between 2003 and 2021, the teams that are paying the most money in the luxury tax have won 13 out of a possible 19 World Series titles and have been in a conference championship a collective 47 times out of a possible 76. Looking at the Yankees and the Dodgers, they alone have won 2 World Series and have appeared in 15 conference championships during this time frame. They're literally paying to win. Other teams like the Kansas City Royals and Oakland Athletics literally cannot compete because they don't have the money to. It's sad both for those teams and for their fan bases. They deserve better, but they're stuck in a system where you can only go so far without having to pay up. And for these smaller market owners who may not have as many liquid assets to convert into cold hard cash, keeping up becomes a nearly impossible challenge. Things need to change in the MLB's financial structure in order to make more teams competitive, but this is baseball, so change is unlikely. After all, it only took the MLB a whopping 120 years to implement any sort of timer for pitchers just to speed the game up. I doubt they're going to be changing their financial structure anytime soon. But this isn't just in the MLB. Something similar occurs in the NBA as well, even if it's not as egregious. The Golden State Warriors have paid the most in luxury taxes since 2001, and they've won 4 titles. The Lakers have used the luxury tax 11 times in this time frame and have won 5 championships. In fact, 5 of the top 7 luxury tax-paying teams play in either New York, Los Angeles, or in the San Francisco Bay Area. And 4 of the top 5 have made it to at least 2 NBA finals since 2001. In fact, the only major exception to this rule seems to be the New York Knicks, whose resume, quite frankly, speaks for itself. Meanwhile, teams like the Charlotte Hornets and New Orleans Pelicans don't make enough to pay any form of luxury tax, and due in part to this financial structure, are nowhere near sniffing a title. The soft cap and luxury tax systems currently in place in the MLB and NBA are real problems, and in part due to them has made these leagues somewhat pay to win. It's the NFL's hard cap structure and monetary rulebook that allows teams the financial flexibility to sign players to lucrative deals, while also ensuring the level of parity and the ability for these teams to compete year in, year out. In fact, it's why teams like the Green Bay Packers don't have an owner but have shareholders in a corporate-style management and even have a free agency, despite operating at a deficit at times, such as when they did in 2020. It's why we as fans can truly have hope if the team really is bad, they'll be able to bounce back within a couple years. It's why in the NFL, unlike every other sports league, teams can truly win on any given Sunday, or Thursday, or Monday, at least in part. And this financial system is really what makes the NFL such an anomaly. Hey guys, just wanted to quickly thank you for watching the video and for supporting the Sports Ball Network. If you liked what you saw, leave a like, leave a comment, and give us some feedback. If you want to see more from us, or you want to see when we upload, subscribe and turn on notifications. Any support helps, and we really, really appreciate it. Again, thanks so much, everybody, for all of the support, especially as we start up the channel, and we're really looking forward to seeing you in the next video. But until then, just take it easy.